Let's have a bit of fun. Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson at one point had a long interview / discussion, whatever you'd like to call it, and they were talking about truth. And they got stuck on this at the very beginning, and it lasted pretty much the entire way. Me and a buddy were talking about this the other day, and we thought, hey, this doesn't seem so reasonable, and here's why. So we talked a bit about truth. So let's walk through it. The two different versions that Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris, and beyond look at. So let's just walk all the way through here. True, in accordance with fact or reality. False, not according with truth or fact, incorrect. So basically false is just, it's not in line with reality. What is knowledge? By normal people definition, facts, information, and skills acquired by a person through experience or education, or the theoretical or practical understanding of a subject, awareness or familiarity gained by experience of a fact or situation. So let's just go with the very first word here, fact. Alright? Fact is just truth. It's a truth information. True information. Alright, so let's look at objective. We're just going to go right through here. Objective. Not influenced by personal feelings or opinions, in considering and representing facts. So facts would be true information. Subjective. Based on or influenced by personal feelings, tastes, or opinions. Now this is a good word that really ties objective and subjective together in a more simplistic way. Consistent. Acting or done in the same way over and over again, especially so as to be fair or accurate. Compatible or in agreement with something. So basically what this means is that it doesn't matter who is observing the thing is still the thing, no matter what. So that's why objective and consistent are tied together this way. Because something that is objective is consistent, person to person, regardless of person to person's observation. It has to do with, is the thing, no matter what, regardless of inconsistent observations. So if 100 people see that something is blue, and the 101st person says it's green, you pretty much have a good idea of which one is the anomaly and which one is not consistent and which one is not objectively reasonable. It's not objective because it's not it's not true because everybody else is observing one thing a certain way. They're measuring a certain thing. That's what observation is a measurement. Using and measurement, it goes further than that in terms of measurement uses a standard thing that is stable, that has zero to do with a person, and it can measure multiple things all with the same measurement device. This could be a scale that measures weight, or it could be a ruler that measures distance, or it could be a clock that measures time. These would be objective measurement devices. Humans can do it pretty much if you look at the trend, so you can find the anomaly. That's not always going to be hyper accurate either in terms of opinions. But if it's an observation, that's different than an opinion, a evaluation. So an observation and an evaluation are completely different. An observation, you're measuring something with your senses, and a opinion is based on a thought or a variation in your genetics that makes you so your measurement of a thing is different from person to person, like taste buds. But when it has to do with something like sight or heat, it'll be more consistent because there's less variation biologically. Alright, so let's go to belief here. Justified true belief. And this is used to find what's true knowledge. This is a concept brought up a while back. And if you look at this, you see that you have your beliefs, you have true things, you have a realm of justification, and that's where your knowledge will be. Now, there has been a counterpoint to this, which would be the Gettier problem, and I'll get that to in a second. So basically, let's think about the process here and some analogous scenarios. So if you have a belief, something has caused you to have a belief. Now, it may be just because something is true, you observe it to be true, like a brick is hard and you don't want to eat it. That's true. And so you also believe it to be true. But you could believe things that you don't know are true or not. But because you don't have any justification. Now I'm gonna go through justification here in a minute. But let's go to the Gettier problem. The Gettier problem basically says something may be believed, something may be true, something may be observed as justified, but still is not actually justified because the truth was done accidentally. It was accidentally true. So, let's say that a person tells 50 people that one sports team is going to win, and then tells 50 different people that the other sports team is going to win. Now, the one team that does win, 50 of those people are going to assume that they knew what the guy was talking about. But he didn't have any real justification. And the only thing that they found as justification was that somebody told them something was true, and it turned out to be true. And the trueness was their justification for believing that those words from the guy were accurate. Now, this isn't really a good way to do justification, and I'll get here in a minute, because this is why we have the scientific method, to be honest. So, justification. The action of showing something to be right or reasonable. So, right would be correct. Reasonable would be able to be reasoned. Of reason, that kind of thing. So your scientific method, a method or procedure that has characterized natural science since 17th century, consisting in systematic observation, measurement, and experiment, and the formulation, testing, modification of hypothesis. So this is basically what you would assume is analogous to this scenario here. You have a belief, you have a hypothesis, and then you try to justify the hypothesis to see if it's true. Or maybe you know it's true, but you want to know why it's true. Either or, it doesn't matter. But you have justification in there. You're testing. Testing is your justification. And then your truth will be either before the justification or after it. Because if you know something is true but you want to know why, you have to test it to find out why. But if you don't know if it's true, you have to test it to find out if it's true. So, the general route, however, is You have a hypothesis, you don't know if it's true, so you test it, you justify it, and then you find out if it's true. So it's the same thing. You justify through experimentation, through testing. Now, the reason the Gettier problem isn't really a problem is because generally when you have the Gettier problem, it is because you are testing in like the most simplistic, basic way. You're not sure. So that's why we have what's called a double-blind test. That's why we have things where you test the same thing over and over and over again to make sure that it wasn't an accident. And you test it from different angles to make sure that the hypothesis is true. But with the Gettier problem, you're not doing that. With the Gettier problem, you're basically doing one test, and if the test shows that you're true, then that the belief is true, then somehow that's believed to be true. Now, at a very simplistic level, that is like the lowest level of confidence in terms of knowledge. And if that's all you have, that's better than nothing. But it is best to test multiple times, to set up your test in a way that doesn't allow for problems. And that's why we have this scientific method. That's why we have double-blind tests. That's why we have these complicated scientific testing methods, is because we don't want to have false knowledge based on a not very good testing method. It's a very low grade confidence testing method if you're only testing it once. Alright, so that's why we have the scientific method. Now we get to something else that Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris were talking about. And here also, Jordan Peterson also mentioned this on the Joe Rogan show. And so there's this concept, and a really good example is an atom. Now, we have a picture of an atom. This is a representation, a visual representation that people have made of an atom. But you can also see that we have other representations of an atom in terms of movement, position of particles, and of course these things aren't going to be red, yellow, blue, etc. They're going, and you're not going to have a physical ring here, and the positions of the items, the particles as well, aren't going to be exactly as visually represented. However, the information is true in terms of generalities, in terms of statistical probabilities. So you are representing the statistical probabilities as a static, as a absolute. Now, that can do a couple of things. It can be true and false at the same time. It's true in terms of its general form, its general and its function, its observable function in terms of its cause-effect systems. But that doesn't mean that when you would actually attempt to view an atom, that it would look like these visual representations we see. They call them probability clouds. So basically, your rings here are just probability clouds, because this is a two-dimensional object as well. So it's not going to be just a two-dimensional ring like this. You're going to see a spherical cloud in layers, and the position of the electron is going to be probabilistic in terms of its relation to other particles, in the same way that the particles on the inside are probabilistic clouds, because for instance, we have string theory, which basically says that these particles aren't spheres, but they are actually strings vibrating. And so if you think about a string vibrating very rapidly, you would have this waveform, but it's not just a two-dimensional waveform. It's a two-dimensional waveform that is in 3 dimensions. So the probability cloud would put the surface at roughly a sphere shape. Now, we're not even sure if that's entirely if string theory is necessarily entirely hyper accurate yet, but it tends to work, and so that's how we have the true claim, because just because we believe it to be true, it operates as true, doesn't mean that it's justified to be true. Lots of things can be noticeably true in function for the most part, but not be hyper accurate. Now, I'm going to get to that right now, actually. So there are 2 different things. We have measurable and we have reasonable. So let's look at measurable. Able to be measured. So humans are only able to measure things to a certain level of specificity, certain level of accuracy. And these levels would be thresholds. But most people will operate with a reasonable amount, a fair and sensible amount. Sensible being basically the operative word here. Appropriate, fair, moderate would also be very usable words here. So in engineering, there's a concept like this, and I'm going to describe tolerance here real first. The ability or willingness to tolerate something in particular the existence of opinions or behaviors that one does not necessarily agree with. That is going to roll right into the second version, but with a different kind of mental setup. So a different conceptual format, I guess you could say. An allowable amount of variation of a specified quantity, especially in the dimensions of a machine or part. Now, the allowable is the really big part here. And variation is also allowable variation. So allowable variable amount of variation in terms of amount. Okay? And so up here, you can look at the concept similarly. The ability or willingness to tolerate something. So basically, you're tolerating an amount. You're willing to allow a certain amount of variation. The ability to do that. Okay? So in engineering, we have that thing called engineering tolerance. So engineering tolerance is the permissible limit or limits of variation in a physical dimension, a measurable value or physical property of a material, manufactured object, system, or service, other measured values, such as temperature, humidity. So, for instance, if I can blow this up here real quick. So let's say, let's see, I can't tell what this is trying to say here. I don't know if that's, I don't think that's inches. Anyway, but let's say you have your maximum and your minimum, but you have your nominal at some point here, and which is what you want it to be. Now, so let's say you have something that is 51 millimeters long. That is your designed parameters for your object. It's 51 millimeters long. Now, you can allow it to be 51.3 millimeters or 50.8 millimeters, and that's your tolerance range. So as long as it falls within that hyper accurate measurement range, you're gonna just consider it 51 millimeters, good and done for your purposes. So when a person looks at their watch and they see it says it's 5 o'clock, but maybe measured by an atomic clock, it's 5 o'clock, but it's like 5 seconds off. So maybe it's 5 o'clock, 5 seconds. Or maybe it is 4 o'clock, but 59 minutes and 58 seconds. So maybe it's like 2 seconds off. But people will see that it's 5 o'clock. It is tolerable to say that. It's a reasonable thing to do. Now, I'm gonna get into that here in a second. Let me go back here. So I'm gonna term these things measurable truth and reasonable truth. Because measurable truth, you can get really pedantic. You can get really specific. You don't need to. Most people only need to be reasonably true, which just means it's true enough to count. It's true enough that doing anything more is unreasonable. So most people operate under reasonable truth, whereas more pedantic people can operate at times under measurable truth. But we even have limits, and that's why why measurable is your limit, because you can't go any further than that. Because if you could, then it would still be measurable. But if it's unmeasurable, that means you're unable to measure it. So we just generally tolerate it and move forward. Now, a bit of a different twist on the truth concept is context. The circumstances that form the setting for an event, statement, or idea in terms of what it can be fully understood and assessed. The parts of something written or spoken that immediately precede and follow a word or passage and clarify its meaning. Now we're going to look at Harry Potter real quick. Is Harry Potter real? Yes and no. Yes, in a specific context. No, in terms of the default context of which people would ask if something is real. Now, it's real because in the context, the non-default context, because Harry Potter is a real character in a fictional context. Okay? But if Harry Potter was not a real character, either in fiction or non-fiction, then Harry Potter wouldn't be a real thing. Now, if you say, now we can also move this to, let's just look at the word fiction here real quick. Literature in the form of prose, especially short stories and novels that describe imaginary events and people. So imaginary is the key part there. So nonfiction being real, factual, measurably to be true. Okay, so there is another context, another example for a context. 2 plus 2 is 4. The default context is real numbers. And in real numbers, 2 plus 2 does equal 4. However, in using imaginary numbers, it is possible to compute 2 plus 2 being 5. So that is also true, but not in the default context. Default context is an extraordinarily useful concept. So there is a few different scenarios in which something is true, but if you want to be pedantic, it's also not true. So it can be both true and false. Because you can have something be reasonably true, but not measurably true. And you can have something that is beyond measurably true, which makes your measurably true be, in fact, realistically false. But you can't measure it to find out. When you have your atom construction, your visualization, it is true in a sense, in terms of function, and relative amount of reasonable usage in terms of probability and description. But it's not realistically true. So you have realistically true, which is beyond measurable. You have measurable, which is beyond reasonable. And then you have anything beyond reasonable basically switches you into a contextual format, which would be default and non-default contexts. So true and false can be many different things. But for me and most people, the default would be reasonable and nonfiction. Whereas the very limits would be observably true, but not measurably justified. So this is why Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris got into their big scuffle about truth. Because truth has many dimensions and ways to look at it. And they just couldn't understand how to come to a conclusion and get on the same page and utilize a default understanding of truth. Understanding that there is a default understanding, a default context, is extremely useful. So hopefully this was both entertaining and useful to you.